One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Good morning and welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. It's 20th of September 2024. We are still on planet Earth, and there are plenty of interesting things that have been happening over the last week and also the week before, and some of them rather more interesting from a perspective of what is going to happen next. And that is probably why many of the people are listening, both to understand what is really going on, but also where we're heading. And where are we heading? It's interesting from a finance perspective. And there has been some recent developments, especially in the US, as you probably know, where many of the banks that have committed to reach net zero targets and participate in international alliances and international organization in relation to their climate impact have withdrawn their commitments to this. And this is, of course, creating a big question. And the question is if Wall Street is really just focusing on finance and returns, or is it focusing on their commitments, underlying commitments, and ability to actually tackle this? You know, since 2015 and Paris Climate Agreement, there has been a quite big focus on finance because most of the shift and transition needs to come somehow from the financial industry in terms of the loans and investments. And there was anticipated that many of the financial firms will actually take some of the cost in relation to this. Now, the recent research that has been done by an organization which is called Institute for International Finance, it's an industry group, which counts the likes of BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, UBS, and many others, just published a corrective of what is being seen or viewed as a harmful misunderstanding. You have to sort of take this one in. What this group is saying is that there has been a huge misunderstanding related to what they call a finance-centric transition. And they are arguing that the fact is that the financial industry, with the capital allocation across the world, will not be able to continue doing what they have committed or tried to do because of the lack of political leadership and the clear political commitments, including the reforms, in order to reach climate targets. It is quite worrying that this is something that is coming right now, given the fact that the economists just, I think, recently came up with information or new sort of a report related to how poor countries are still poor, and 3 billion people are very poor, and the globalization and the way how we transform our economies is not getting where it should. And it's also interesting from a perspective that 2015, according to economists, this is the sort of a last year where the poor countries, based on the underlying economic model we run, have managed to improve their conditions. So they are about many people in the world, they are still not really where they should be from a perspective of economic growth. And this is also related to a fact that financial flows, especially in these countries, and also financial flows related to a transition to more sustainable economic models, is actually not taking place. Now, there is a lot of discussion, and has been since we are on the financial side, in relation to Al Gore, the former US candidate for presidency. And Al Gore is also running a very successful asset management investment company based out of London called Generation Investment Management. And every year, Al Gore comes out with a new sort of a angle of where the development is and what needs to be done. And James, I know that you have been looking at this, especially from a perspective of what he's trying to tell us. And from that angle, welcome, James, to One Step Ahead Radio. How do you see what Al Gore is trying to sort of tell us on where we need to go?
Yeah, hi, good morning, Sasha. Good to be here with you again. There's lots of interesting report. I suppose it's quite funny. A few years ago, everyone used to be waiting for the Larry Fink letter every year, and this has kind of become the alternative in the sustainability world, and the thoughts from Al Gore and his team at Generation. I think what they've tried to say and what he's trying to say at this very tricky political time is, there was all this enthusiasm in recent years, especially sort of Glasgow COP conference of parties, and a lot of commitments being made, especially as you've said before just now, like from financial institutions, big business, and politicians about how we, are meeting the challenge, and we're going to be urgent, and we're going to decarbonize and phase out fossil fuels, and all of this. And it's a kind of realization that there's been a big slowdown in that. And his whole framing of it is like, promises are easy to make, but it's a bit like New Year's resolutions. It's easy to say something on or on January the 1st, but when you come to April the 1st, you find they're not so strong anymore.
But he's also alluding to this new upcoming elections in the US as being pivotal in terms of how the action or responsibility will be taken forward. I mean, I think he's trying to give us a hint that, election of one of the presidential candidates, Mr. Donald Trump, will probably alter the many different angles of how this sort of action going forward will be shaped. What do you think he's trying to tell us?
Yeah, it's the closing of the letter. He uses this phrase. He talks about one of the main problems is human and economic inertia. And I think the whole report, if you go through it and all the different topics that they cover, whether it's, sort of decarbonizing hard to abate industries or the energy sector, they sort of point out that there's all of these sort of ingredients that we have, the technologies, the solutions are there. We know that, but there's this like human and economic inertia, which is really the kind of the political process, how people vote, the kind of politicians that they choose on these issues is going to be key. Obviously, he doesn't reference directly the election, but it's clear, and I think a lot in financial markets are feeling that this is a pivotal moment, sort of for climate action, for renewable action, etc. Of saying, are people actually going to support politicians who are trying to take us in the right direction, or people who are even fueling denialism or all of this? So
when we were there was this very scary article I read in the Bloomberg the other day, and it's actually related to the fact that people it's not an article, it's actually a couple of studies and research has been done internationally. The people who are affected by catastrophes, climate-related ones, the droughts, the floods, and all of that, the way how they vote is actually not really altered by this. And the research shows that in Germany after 2021 flooding, there has been basically no movement, even though the Green Party in Germany, together with many other Green parties, is trying to address sort of the imminent threat to the livelihoods of the people in the long run. One of the answers based on that study was the fact that people don't care or are not able to care about things that will happen in a 3, 5, 10, 15 years perspective. They want aid when they are hit by these droughts and floods today. And that is also one of the conclusions in these reports, that people tend to vote for governments that are in power at the time when this happens because they are very much dependent on them. There are some deviations in the US. The study has been done there too. But why do you think, James, of course, this is not an easy question. Why do you think people are, despite what they're experiencing, they have big difficulties to shift the way how they actually vote based on what they feel on their skin in terms of the impacts the climate change is creating?
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a very interesting dynamic for our times. I wonder, it's, kind of a certain extent, it's the systemic complexity of, economic relationships, and also short-termism and short-sightedness. We see that a lot also in the corporate domain. There's a lot of discussion going on about, where we're going with ESG. Lots of articles flying around this week about, the next where's ESG going in this whole political and economic situation. Do companies also, apart from voters, have that medium long-term vision to sort of propose solutions rather than just see for their short-term economic or social advantage. It
You
seems to
know,
be a bit negative in the moment in terms
no,
of.
but it's not. I don't see it as that. I see it as a sort of a. It's a normal sort of a junction of the investment approach that ESG or this kind of a investment approach that builds on environmental, social, and governance indicators relevant for companies. But what is interesting for me is that there is so much debate and discussion about what is the next step for ESG investments or sustainability investments, but very little discussion about what is the next step for the mainstream investments, given the fact that these investments are still in majority across the world and they are not delivering returns that are non-financial. They're actually just delivering, in many cases, just a financial return. So the question is sort of how do we move from that discussion into something that is what is the next for investments in general. It's not about ESG. It's not about sustainability. It's all about how do we deploy financial capital in far more responsible way that we have done before. And in that context, I know, James, that the solar power, and I read the article about the fact that the renewable energy investments in the world last year were actually much higher than in fossil fuel and that kind of type of energy. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, it's perhaps one of the positive notes in the generation annual sustainability trends about the fact that $2 is being spent in renewable energy for every $1 on fossil fuel. The sense that it's now becoming the dominant force in terms of investment in new electricity generation globally. The unfortunate point is that the investment in fossils continues to grow, although renewables is much faster. And I actually picked up on this in a really interesting report on the solar power industry globally by EMBA, which is a UK-based think tank, and they're looking at, they've updated their projections on 2024 installations globally, and it's just keeps on breaking. Like 2003, 2024, 2023, 24 have just kind of broken all bounds in terms of what predictions were just a year before, 2 years before. And again, this year is going to be another blockbuster. They think it's going to be another blockbuster year in terms of investment. I saw in another report that solar power installed capacity is now 5 times the amount that's installed in nuclear power globally. And they say this really could be a game changer. And a similar note to Al Gore, they're really putting the focus now on investment in grids, investment in batteries, changing the economic and the electricity systems to kind of accept all of this vast amount of solar energy and kind of rethink our economic models around that, because they say that just the speed of action, we're actually is one area where we're going to meet our targets for 2030 for tripling renewable energy. So that's a very positive, interesting report. I think it's worth digging into.
No, but I think that I looked at these sort of grid-related challenges, especially in the U.S. earlier, but also across Southeast Europe. It's a big challenge for countries that have not developed the grid capacity. In the U.S., as you probably know, the grids are not federal; they are scattered across the country, and it's one of the biggest challenges to take on the renewable energy that is, despite everything, produced. So, on a positive note, what you are saying, James, is that renewable energy or investments in solar might be the great game changer. I tend to agree to that. And it is very important also from another aspect, another angle, and that is the latest sort of a doomsday glacier. It's called Thwaites Glacier. And there has been reports coming out from the researchers that are looking at the way how the warm seawater is speeding the retreat of this glacier, which act as a backstop for the huge West Antarctic ice sheet. And if this happens, it's basically what they say is that more than 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles thick in places, this glacier has been linked to what is called cork in a bottle. It's stopping the rest of it to sort of move and melt. Were it to collapse, sea levels would rise by 65 centimeters, which is about 26 inches. That's already a significant amount, given oceans are currently rising at 4.6 millimeters per year. This is, of course, something that, going back to what we discussed, the people in their daily lives don't feel, because it's something that is happening somewhere, somehow in the future. They don't feel it right now. So short-sightedness, both from politicians and also on an individual level, is probably the reason why action is not really taking place in across the world. Now, James, I know that Lundqvist has done some interesting research on human rights, and this is related to CSRDDD and many of these other acronyms. But I think what is interesting is also to get people to join us next week for a longer session, about 30 minutes, where we go through some of the research you have done, especially on Italian market. Anything you would like to sort of highlight right now to get people to join us next week?
Yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting discussion, because what we've been looking at is not the purely, the compliance scenario that's changing, obviously, with the European regulations coming in and due diligence requirements, but it's actually kind of a change in culture and mindset in some industries, in some companies, that they're really feeling that this is the time to sort of step up their commitment and be more clear and proactive about how they're talking about it. They really see it as, not just responding to regulatory or investor pressure, but actually a point where they can really talk about, the S of ESG, really about the social and the people and the human impact of what they're trying to do. And so that's a very interesting dynamic that we've been looking at, and we'll talk about that next week.
Fantastic. Many thanks, James. Thank you all for listening. Please tune in next week. Interesting research, a lot of discussion on where it goes. Thank you very much. I wish you all a great weekend. And tune in next week for an update from One Step Ahead Radio, one of the best global updates on sustainability and ESG development. Have a great Friday and great weekend. Thank you very much.